For WXXI, this is Connections, filling in for Evan Dawson. I'm Gino Finelli. Today's connection was made on March 31st, 2021. On that day, then-Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act into law, legalizing recreational cannabis in New York. But the rollout was anything but smooth. Lawsuits stalled the granting of retail licenses. Farmers who were granted a first crack at the marketplace were left sitting on literal tons of weed, and the state was left scrambling to crack down on a flourishing black market. But now, many of those growing pains have finally somewhat been quelled, and the industry passed the $1 billion mark in sales for the first time in 2024. So to discuss where legal pot has been and where it's headed, we are joined by Felicia Reid, acting Executive Director of the Office of Cannabis Management. Felicia, thanks for being here. Oh, she's not on yet. Oh, okay. Zach Sarkis, founder of FLWR City Collective. Zach, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Gino.
And Jayson and Britni Tantalo, co-founders of the New York Cannabis Retailers Association and owners of FLWR City Dispensary in Victor. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
It's always ladies first. Thank you. Definitely.
So while we're waiting for Felicia, I wrote a story back over the summer on Britni and Jayson's story in trying to enter the retail cannabis marketplace. And it was a struggle, it sounded like, for you guys, and you finally opened your doors last month. And I want to give you a chance to talk about what it took to get there, the years-long struggle to finally be able to open a retail dispensary and become operational. So I want to give you a chance to tell your story.
Oh, you want me to go first? I thought it's ladies first.
Doesn't matter.
So, I mean, Britni and I, we're not shy to, kind of show or tell our story. We've been in the industry for quite some years on the legal side and the ancillary side, since 2014. This industry is not for the weak. So, like, if you're not prepared to fight and scratch and some cases choke out, things to get in the front, like, you probably won't sustain, any type of operations, being in the industry. Cannabis is cutthroat. What we found was through collective, kind of like collective mindsets, collaboration, was kind of the key to success. So, through our networking opportunities, Britni and I decided to connect with farmers. That was right from the beginning. We would drive through the entire state to go see these farms firsthand. What we do in our previous experience in cannabis industry, marketing is everything. So when we seen that New York State was going legal, and they were, giving these licenses to the farmers, the first thing that we thought was, let's elevate this industry. Let's show what cannabis is all about, because we've been in the shade and in the dark for so long, and now you see the state regulators promoting what they're doing, but they didn't see, what was really in the fields. So we went to farms, and then we shared our experience through clips, short-minute clips and reels. We kind of did that along the way with retailers and processors and cultivators, kind of just networked, but I mean, that's just a sliver. This is.
Just side note, do us a favor and watch the language a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I apologize.
That's okay.
Yeah, okay.
This journey has taken us over 2 years to come to fruition. Certainly was a struggle, Gino, like you had mentioned. It put extreme, financial harm, emotional, mental harm. None of us initially who signed up for the card or conditional adult use recreational dispensary license anticipated we wouldn't get turnkey dispensaries or any type of aid or assistance in, really being the first to market. So that in itself was a battle to overcome. But then personally, the upstate region in particular, from that first lawsuit, really hurt us. I think we're still trying to recover from that. Even our farmers who couldn't, Zach couldn't sell the FLWR City Dispensary if he wanted to because we couldn't open. So it put everybody in the supply chain under major constraints. And then a lot of us were advised to go get leases, and that if we got those leases, we would have priority. Jayson and I were one of those families that went and got a lease and held it for a year empty, paying rent, trying to find ways to pay it just to be able to keep it. Because so many municipalities have opted out, where are we to go? And not just our family, but many others throughout the state of New York. So to be open and have cut that ribbon is everything for our family. And not just for us, but people in these communities who have waited for a very long time to know that things are changing and our community will have the economic benefits that maybe other areas throughout the state have got to experience, because Rochester is in need, in the greater Rochester area, of the tax dollars to help go back into the disenfranchised communities. And Jayson and I, we just wanted to be a part of that, being justice involved ourselves, coming from this culture that he spoke of. So the word to describe it is grateful and just happy.
So I believe we have Felicia on the line now. Is that correct?
Hi, yes.
Hi, Felicia. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So what Britni was just describing was, I think, a situation a lot of people entering the cannabis industry, particularly in the Finger Lakes, had experienced. We were one of the last to get the green light to open retail dispensaries due to some of the legal challenges. And now we're kind of sort of entering a period of normalcy, it sounds like. And there's some specifics here I want to get into, but I want to start from the kind of an overhead view with you of, it's been a long road and a sluggish rollout to get cannabis where it could be in New York. And I think we're still on that path. But I want to give you a chance to tell us where you think we are now as far as developing the marketplace across the state.
Yeah. So one, I want to say hi to Britni and Jayson. It's good to be with you guys here again, and I'm so glad that you guys are open. I know you've fought for this for you and your family, and I'm thrilled. In terms of OCM, we just passed, of course, in 2024, and this is not our work. This is the work of folks like Britni and Jayson and dispensaries and communities and families who are doing this work in cannabis and making this industry what it is. And so, of course, in the last, year, we passed that $1 billion mark in terms of adult use sales, $1,005,000 to be exact, at the end of 2024. And so I think with that kind of growth, with that kind of presence, I think that the market is on its way to seeing, more expansion, more growth, more folks entering in terms of being part of this marketplace that I know so many folks do want to be a part of. And so from the agency's perspective, it's always a matter of, are we setting up supports and structures to support that? Are we listening to the community? Are we really deeply locked in and engaged and hearing back from communities and stakeholders about what's working and what's not? And that would also cause us to sort of rethink how we're proceeding in the future. I am not the kind of person who likes to do without information, and that's always going to come from the cannabis community. So I'm excited to keep doing that work in 2025 and the years to come.
So I want to turn to Zach here. You're more on the grower and production side of things. You've been around cannabis for a very long time. Again, last year I wrote 2 stories that were really exploring some of the challenges that dispensaries had and then some of the challenges that growers were having in this marketplace. So for you, I want to give you a chance to tell your story of, where you were coming from, the challenges in getting into the legal marketplace, and where you're at now.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gino. Thanks for letting us be here. It's really wild to think about the early days of these first dispensaries. I don't care if I'm on their shelf or not. Anyone opening is a win. And it keeps feeling like that, where it's, coming from a place where if you had a relationship to the cannabis plant, you were a criminal. Still in the federal government's eyes, we are criminals for what we're doing. So just seeing any movement has been really just like a dream come true from someone who's been consuming for, since my childhood. And that's pretty cool. So in the beginning days, as a producer that was manufacturing, joints, for example, and trying to get to market, I spent a lot of time on the road and going to see these different shops that are opening, seeing the different struggles, the pressure points, the over-competition or oversaturation on shelf space because there's only so many stores open. They can only carry so many brands. So a lot of those kind of early stage ripples were really challenging to deal with. And I got denied on so many different shops, but luckily found some really good partners that did bring us on. Our price was right. Our quality was right. Our service was right. All of those things have kept us on the shelf over years. And for us, our biggest edge, we were just talking about this earlier. It's like there really isn't actually enough weed being grown in New York right now. So as a brand or a small farm, how do you maintain stable shelf life? Like, how do I create a relationship with the dispensary, be a good client to keep my product's quality at the right price and over time, so they're not having to like reset their shelves. And essentially like not to run out, because the true cost of getting onto a dispensary is one thing, but then to get, let's say I run out of product and I have to get back onto that, it can be much harder. So there's been a lot of little struggles in that department. From a production standpoint, like, we've been growing on a small certified organic vegetable farm where like luckily a small group of 4 guys who all have their own relationship to cultivation over a long period of time could come together, bootstrap, and turn a vegetable farm, raised bed, no-till, living soil, like awesome veggie food into something where cannabis can grow and show what it can do in New York State. We've seen a lot of highs, a lot of lows. On the low side, the disease stuff that we're seeing in cannabis, like, all agriculture is exposed to different blights, for example. And so trying to begin building a brand, building a production platform that like actually pays wages, like how many years are we in this not paying ourselves anything, let alone then building out a team to then like sustain livelihoods. It's like we're feeding babies through this work we're doing, but it could, one bad disease could wipe out our crop and maybe make this all go away or what have you. So there's been a lot of different growth points, pain points, and then also, joys of like, it's still, I don't actually register that I'm growing legal cannabis and it's being sold. It's kind of just like I'm doing what I've been doing for a long time, working really hard. And every so often someone's like, how does it feel? I'm like, I don't know. I'm stressed out, but it's good. So, I definitely have seen with the more shops opening, like this vacuum and this demand, and like, really the players who want to support small businesses are really coming to the forefront, more community building and just going from fight or flight into some form of sustenance, whether it be dispensaries or small farms, has been a huge transition. But also in that window, we've seen a lot of people drop out. Like how many farms like got completely screwed over because there weren't any of these promised dispensaries open? How many dispensaries couldn't open the door without either massive debt or like what have you because of the time it took to open? And there's a plethora more issues we could be critical of probably more throughout this program, but just like high level, that's a lot of what I've been seeing. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, like we got shops like MJ Good Life FLWR City Dispensary here in this region that have been just like kicking butt and like being an inspiration for the community. And we're here to support them and the team that's helping like drive our brand, our farm to market.
Yeah, and so, part of the background of what Zach's talking about here is in February 2022, Governor Kathy Hochul passed conditional growers licenses, which allowed cannabis farmers to grow recreational cannabis. And that was a really exciting thing at the time. And the problem was, once they harvested that cannabis, there was not a lot of places to sell it. There was not enough dispensaries open. The legal challenges had kept it stalled. And Felicia, I want to turn to you and just give you a chance to tell us, are we past that? Are we past that point of the system not being able to handle both the production and the retail side due to some of the challenges it was facing early on? Do you think that we are heading into a place of stability?
So, 2025 January is a very different place from 2022. And then when I came in, I had heard very pointedly, of the struggles of cultivators in getting product to market. And so it's been very pointed for me to make sure that, we have balance across the system. Do our cultivators, do our farmers have a place to put their product ultimately? And I think about this a lot. I have a small holding farm in Niskayuna, not of cannabis, but of other things. I have grown cannabis. And so I'm very much aware that when we're talking about a live crop, an organic crop, something that needs to find its place, we can't sort of have the types of hiccups and operational and logistical delays that we saw early on in the program. I think now we're in a pretty different place. What we're finding, especially with this most recent harvest year, and I know it was a banger of a year for many cultivators across the state, good weather, opportunity to harvest without it raining and creating mold and all of these things. And so I think, folks are finding places for their product. I spent a lot of time with our market and policy analysis team looking at how are things moving across the supply chain and where are the stress points, where are the issues. And it's been good to see that, where we are in the end of 2024 and going into 2025 is cultivators finding those places for their products. I think we want to expand that going forward, of course, but one thing I want to be very pointed about is the thing that we're always thinking about as an agency, which is sustainability. We live in a blessed climate with about 153 growing days, but we are also subject to environmental challenges and climate change. And so how does that impact the cannabis industry? How does that impact growers? How does that impact processors? How does that impact dispensaries who are at the end who are downstream from the plant, but have a very critical role to play in how all of this works? And so that is something that as an agency that we're always thinking about and paying attention to, because we want to make sure that there is balance across all sides of the supply chain and making sure that people are able to sort of do what they love and do what they do and find a place for it in the market.
So one of the things that I think Zach just described and that I've heard a lot is that there were so many options and so many growers at a point in time that there really wasn't shelf space for the dispensaries that were open, that they had to be really selective. And, for Flower City Dispensary, I mean, how are you picking and choosing now who you're partnering with? And do you think there's enough room in the marketplace now for everyone who is earnestly trying to compete in it to survive?
For us in particular, we really focus more on a curated menu. I don't need to show people 100 types of flower, 100 types of vapes to really satisfy their need, whether it be for wellness, whether it be for fun, to go to bed at night. Jayson and I, due to our experience, we've had the opportunity to meet with these cultivators and processors personally. So we have an in-depth knowledge of, where the product come from, who makes them, where is it? Is it in Batavia? Is it Zach in Rochester area? And with that, we're able to provide high-level quality products, knowing them, not just placing random things on the shelf. I absolutely believe there's room for more brands and more growth. We have certain economic constraints, like we have a lot of municipalities that have opted out, so we don't even really truly know a true cannabis market right now going into 25. Just looking at Rochester, you guys, look at Gates and Greece, and they've all opted out. Those are major markets for cannabis just here in Rochester. So I think that it is there. I think, to Felicia's point, sustainability of each segment of the supply chain is so critical. I think that due to what has occurred previously that we're kind of working out, we need to come together and find what is going to be the solution, right? Not the Band-Aid. And our infrastructure has been very weak. I can say from a retail standpoint, the OCM has done a great job in answering people. You can call, they're corresponding. I know that we're going to have specific representatives with license holders in the future. And I think we just need to give it a little bit of time so that it's done right. We don't want to rush and go back. I don't think anybody could take that right now. So I'm very optimistic in where OCM is going and speaking with the community. I don't think I've had, and others in the upstate region have had this much correspondence with them ever. And I'm grateful and want to acknowledge that because we're not New York City and we've endured a lot of different hurdles. So I'm grateful to Felicia and the office and Pat and everyone there who's working hard to try to get us up and running and on the map. So people should be optimistic. Infrastructure is being built, cannabis is being considered, and the community's voices are being considered. Again, I'm grateful my doors are open, and I see so many of my friends who were trapped emerging and moving forward so that Zach can go and sell his wonderful weed and so many others.
So I want to touch on, when we're talking about the economics of this, we mentioned earlier in the hour that we passed the 1 billion mark in sales the past year. I was reading before we came in here a report from Whitney Economics. It's estimating within 2 years, the New York retail market could be about $6 billion. The potential here is huge. It's a massive industry that is poised to grow at a very, very fast rate over the next few years. Felicia, I'll ask you, I mean, this is the potential here is we're not even close to touching on what's being projected yet. How do we get there? I mean, what do you think the state has to do to be able to embolden a marketplace that is able to capture the true potential of what this industry is here?
Yeah, so the Whitney report, when it came out, I can't tell you how many people sent it to me as if I hadn't already seen it. But what I'm glad to say is that it actually falls quite in line with where our market team has projected the industry at going through 2030. And so, one of the things that we're considering is, and I don't mean to overuse the term seed to sale, but we have to think about supply chain and sustainability from seed all the way to sale. And that also means not oversaturating in any way, shape, or form any part of the market such that we tank it, right? We have this precious thing. We have this amazing thing that is built, that is founded on social and economic equity. I don't take those as buzzwords. We can't break it, right? And so what my job is, and what my team's job is, and what this agency is to really be considered about how we're analyzing the market and really making recommendations to the board around how we should be proceeding. As to that Whitney report, I was glad to see it because it falls right in line with where our economics team had projected. I think we've projected between 6.2 and 7.5 billion, which is an insane amount of opportunity. And we want to make sure that's maximized. But, like I said, we can't maximize that if we're sort of laissez-faire or not keeping our eye on what's happening in each sector, seed to sale. And so that's something that the office and I are very, very pointedly working on. And I was glad that we put our economic outlook and recommendation in front of our Cannabis Advisory Board, who are folks who are industry practitioners and have a particular perspective. They saw that analysis. It was, pages and pages of analysis and charts, and they were like, this makes sense for what we experience in this market, what we see in this market, but also for what we've seen happen in other jurisdictions. And I know all the folks on this call can point to a state and see how they've oversaturated in certain areas, and now they're facing valueless licenses. That is not something we want to see in our market in any way, shape, or form.
Zach, you seem like you have something to add here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it must be noted for the general public that New York State is the biggest consumer market for cannabis in the world. If not, like just across the board. It's going to take us a long time to grow enough weed to satiate every corner of the state, which is a gift. And as we're talking about sustainability, I think, there's a few different words, like how that plays in. There's obviously environmental sustainability. We hear about that. Like, is this going to deplete nature, or is this going to make it, can we sustain this form of production, or is it going to take away from let's say, our soil, or add more, global greenhouse emitting gases, for example. That's one thing we're familiar with. Then the next question is like economic sustainability. And in that, can small businesses sustain? That's a question I'm really asking. Like, what does a dispensary need to be able to sustain? What does a small farm need to operate to be able to sustain? And, looking at that projection of like multi-billion, we'll be at 6 billion, like we'll be at 10 billion soon enough. Like, it's going to be huge when there's on-site consumption and like actual, like moving towards the true freedom of this plant and people being able to sell it in the multiplicity of ways that I think we're already doing it, but it might not be technically legal or licensed yet. That's really important. But I do think from a producer standpoint and the sustainability standpoint is like, we're looking at right now currently, of the billion that just got sold, like how much of that was like a couple companies? How much of that was the biggest cannabis producing companies in the world that are like selling? I think the data is like 3,000 pounds a month is coming through Dank, for example, Dank by definition, which is like cool. I don't know them. I know they're sourcing from some of the biggest grower, registered organizations, cultivation facilities, which is absolutely unsustainable, and at price points that are being sold that are driving market price down. So there's one thing like, what's the value of a license? There's also what's the value of flower. And if we look to Oregon, where there was a massive overproduction based off big players, the value of cannabis became nothing. And so many small producers were forced out of that market. And it's a really strange place to be in, where agriculture traditionally in the United States, let alone New York, has so much protection. Small businesses have so much protection, tax write-offs, all these things. And cannabis continuously is this outlier that doesn't get those supports. And again, coming from this place, like I'd love to see a 1,000 small farmers growing the best weed in the world, going through small mom and pop retail locations. but the trend towards it so easily trends towards massive production, driving down costs, forcing out small players. So it's this whole other side of sustainability. Like, is this a sustainable business model? Is this a sustainable industry? That's big.
It could be sustainable if and what's up, Felicia? How you doing? Thank you. Appreciate you guys being on the call. If you look at sustainability and you look at the micro license, expanding their canopy, maybe allowing them to have mixed cultivation indoor and out, would be somewhere where I would look for, sustainability. Given the current cultivators, an expanded reach of canopy, going from 12.5 to 25,000 square foot would be, resourceful to keep the current players in the game. Right. And then we have to worry about, like, farmers. I come from a production side as well. I've been growing for, 20 years. Right. So when you look at, like, supply and demand, keeping the big guys in, or the big guys out, but allowing them to come in, we need to allow these cultivators that have been promised, that were suffering, to at least get the opportunity to compete while the big guys are coming in. I know you had mentioned, Felicia, giving, and not to stir the pot a little bit, but, because we support you. We're 100% on board to keep you in office, and we always, support that. But we need to really look at, how we can minimize the discounts of these big box coming in. Suggesting, reducing fees is not favorable for many. So
yeah, you want to have conversations around that. I mean, honestly, guys, like, nothing's perfect. I think to expect everything to be answered or corrected right now is impossible. But
Totally.
What would have been cool is to see that $1 billion sale and what store it came from, and then celebrate that. That would have been cool.
I agree. The little things.
Yeah, I think this is like the ever-present threat that everyone was concerned about when legalization happened, that it would just be the mass market companies that have a lot of infrastructure and a lot of capital behind them would be the ones that dominated immediately.
Even on that note, like, the MRTA was written, as we said, socioeconomic justice oriented. And part of that was the ROs have to wait their turn.
Right.
And when they come in, they got to pay the money that's going to be reinvested in communities. And, like, we've seen what lawsuits do. We see what lobbying does and how quickly social justice and economic justice can be eroded. We also see the strong fight and the resilience of small players and community coming together to advocate. And it really, if we see anything, money talks, and organizations and associations, the role that the community can play is much stronger than the individual. And so, small players getting together and advocating for their rights and what they need as small businesses is equally as important when we see what high finance organizations can do in any industry, but specifically an emerging market like cannabis. It's wild.
Well, I've met those families, the small farmers that you speak of that are really struggling. It's horrible. Their children, they've invested everything. I completely understand. They should have to wait their turn. People really, we've seen for sale signs on farms. People never really even got off the start because of the injunctions and lawsuits that occurred prior. So it's, again, going back, having these conversations, and I think the first time ever, the OCM is willing to at least listen and have these conversations.
They've been great. It's amazing what's been accomplished. The
Right.
OCM did the unbelievable in a short amount of time.
Right.
And you were saying earlier, like, we can't keep looking at the past, but moving forward, like, what are we doing? How can we? And, like, that's an ongoing. This is part of that conversation. Yeah.
And the fact that Felicia's on is
awesome.
the
awesome.
first step to show. No, seriously.
Thank you.
It's been challenging and troubling. If you weren't, a chosen child by the previous administration, you wouldn't even get a wink, right? And now you're on the phone with us in,
so
Rochester.
many others in the community that can attest to that.
Felicia, and I do want to kind of just build on this. Virtually every state that's legalized has had some social justice provision in their legalization, and virtually all of them have failed miserably in that effort. Illinois was a great example of that. There's a really great Chicago Tribune article that came out about a year after legalization, and the effort was that at the time that someone who is a person of color was supposed to be the premier person who had the first access to the industry because that community was most impacted by criminalization. A year on, as the dispensaries opened, there was not a single person of color even serving in an ownership or partner role in any cannabis operation that opened in the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois, as far as I remember. That's just an example of how it can fail. But New York really put a strong effort to try to make this the core and heart of the law that we passed in 2021. And I want to give you a chance to say, how are we meeting that goal of undoing the harms of criminalization and reinvesting into the communities that were most impacted by decades of harsh cannabis laws?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Gosh, I mean, do you want to be here for 6 hours? I have a lot of answers.
I don't really have much planned for the rest of the day. So
Right. Yeah, we're available too.
She's like, I do. I have a lot planned.
I got this. Here we go. So, what I think is really interesting, and, I've experienced this state from the legislative perspective. Have I worked there? I've been a court attorney, and now I'm in the executive. So I've been in all three branches to be able to see, it's not just drafting a law and hoping it gets implemented in the way you hope. It's also around creating regulations and policies and standards that support the mission that you want to see. And what's really been great about New York is I feel like I look across the country and I know, cannabis in different jurisdictions, has a different flavor and a different feel. But what I also see is they're trying to back into the equity mission instead of putting it at the front. Right. And so with New York, what has been really great is that if you look at the statute and you look at the regs, there are specific criteria that we have to meet as a state that are inexorable. We cannot not meet those. Otherwise, we're failing ourselves and we're failing our community and we're failing our state. It's been really impactful to see, month on month, we're hitting above that 50% of C categorization in our licensure. That's incredibly important. But of course, to me, that's okay, great. Now it's 2024. What's happening in 2025? We're getting to a point where we're going to be looking at the December queue. What I know about the December queue is there are so many CDIs, community disproportionately impacted applicants, in that cohort. And so we do have to reach those folks. We do have to get those folks. We do need to be part of this market. And so the question is, how are we doing that? How are we thinking about that? What are we putting in place as a matter of structure that keeps allowing those folks who are most impacted by the cannabis laws to participate in this market? And I'll just give a little bit of how I really think about it. My history is in juvenile justice. I've worked with youth and families that have been traumatized since the day they were born. And a lot of the youth and families that I work with are the legacies of the war on drugs. And to me, I always think about what I would do when I would sit down with them. And I would say, what do you want to be? And half of them had never thought about what they would want to be because they didn't expect to live that long. Right. But when you finally get, their trust and their reliance, what I would always categorically hear from them is, I want to own a business. Right. I want to own a business. And we'd say, well, what kind of business? Construction, all these different things. But what does owning a business mean? That means a degree of independence, a degree of agency, a degree of autonomy. Especially when you're talking about communities who are harmed by the war on drugs. There are so many communities who have been told what to do, told where to be, and then incarcerated at the end of it. Right? I don't want that cycle to continue. That cycle can't continue. And I think the MRTA offers this opportunity to take the skills that people have. If you've been selling for decades, if you've been growing for decades, that's a skill we want to see in the market. We don't want to prioritize folks who are just folks can be starting out and be in this business. But, we know that as New Yorkers, some of the best cannabis in the world is grown here. Some of the best folks who understand this plant, its history and its power, are right here. Some of the consumers, we're high taste as a state, and so we want to leverage the talent and the skill and the experience that's here, regardless of where it comes from, but really appreciating those legacies, right? I think of this now when I think of the youth that I served is, I want their legacy to be different. And I think cannabis is a way and an avenue in which that legacy can be different, just offering them other opportunities based on the things they know and the things they've experienced.
So we're going to take our first break of the hour, and we'll come back and we talk about cannabis more. And we're back on Connections, and we are talking about the cannabis industry. And, I think in the latter half of this hour, one of the things I'd really like to talk about is everyone in the studio here, it comes from the quote-unquote legacy marketplace. You were around before cannabis legalization happened, and this is a hard industry. Every person I've talked to it's hard work to keep it afloat and to, really make your way for it. It's not just, a golden goose that you enter it and you are able to make a massive profit. So I want to give a chance for all of you to talk about why cannabis, why you entered this marketplace, and why you're still here. Zach, I'll start with you on this. I mean,
yeah, cool.
You've been around for a while, so tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, my own, no more than anyone. It's I remember I bought weed for the first time in 7th grade, and I remember I lost friends by 8th grade because of my consumption. My senior year of high school, I was wearing the hemp iPaths, and every day it's after school I'd get together with my crew and we would consume. Kind of ritualistically and beginning to create a deeper level of relationship to myself, relationship to the people around me, to this plant. I was introduced to super high quality indoor cultivation at a pretty young age and was the point person, who was able to be the distribution and the trusted kind of confidant and having access to that and seeing how that can help sustain a family who is living on the line or substantially below, let's say, the line of poverty. But this plant is both a medicine to them and their family, as well as a tool to be able to put food on the table or Christmas presents under the tree. And just knowing this innate thing where in this world of as we would consume cannabis, not once did it make us more violent, not once did it make us terrible people. In fact, it helped relieve all these traumas that we were dealing with as kids in this strange American culture we live in. And so early on, just knowing there's this disassociation about how awesome of a plant this is and how we were so bad for having a relationship to it, so much so that ostracization pushed so much of my friend group to consume in the darkness or just be my friend got arrested in his EMS jacket as a volunteer because he was smoking weed and his life was almost ruined. A teenage volunteer who cared so much about the community, but because of his relationship to cannabis, he was now a criminal and just he could have lost everything because of that. And so many of us who had a relationship with this plant and then kind of pushed to the sidelines of the fringe of society, I think that fueled so many more different iterations of drug use and abuse, which, we all know the opioid epidemic and how intimately that's harmed so many of us in this room, let alone the community at large. And so much of that, I believe, stems in not only to the war on drugs, but the criminalization of cannabis. And yeah, my senior year of high school, I gave a speech on the utilitarian value of hemp. And that's the only thing I could talk about where I wouldn't stutter or be afraid to talk in front of my peers. My senior year of university, I met one of the leading researchers in North America on industrial hemp, who was actually driving the research to select the cultivars for hempcrete or for the best grain varietal, because the seed is a superfood, 30% protein, 30% omega-3, 6 fatty acid. This thing is cannabis is incredible. And I studied sustainable development when I went to the University of Vermont, and I was also blessed to meet some of the best growers in the Northeast, coming out of the mountains of Vermont. Some of the herb that was being grown in 2007, 8, 9 was just unbelievable. So this utilitarian aspect, but then also the super high quality craft thing has kind of always been with me. I got illegally wiretapped when I was 17 for my first, I picked up my first amount of weight, and I almost went to prison for that. And the detective at the time boldly lied to my parents saying I'm selling heroin and LSD and all this stuff, when all I was doing was sourcing when it was a drought, there wasn't herb around, and I was able to find it. All of those things impacted my this contradictory experience of how awesome of a plant this is versus how terrible one can be treated in relationship to. And of course, I come from so much relative privilege and was able to glide a razor's edge through so many situations where so many of my friends didn't have that. And so as we're looking, again, my continued education in sustainable development, sustainable agricultural practices, these things that really there is no choice but creating practices that are regenerative, that rebuild soil, that rebuild community. And working on the West Coast and seeing how communities were rebuilding around this plant, like young people creating systems, having enough money to raise money for a friend's mother's cancer bill. You know what I mean? But like, we're talking about like young people like being like, oh, we got this and we've been building this. And like all of that, that's my personal kind of relationship and journey to then come back to New York where it's like 2018, like I put grain variety in the soil because we could grow legal cannabis. And that was just so special to me. And trusting that it's the most industrious plant on the planet, the amount of jobs it's going to create, and also the benefit that people get from consuming this, like all of that checks these boxes of like, this is worthy of trying, worthy of putting up with the stress and the chaos that is owning a small business, let alone like one that's basically illegal still in the federal government's eyes. But that's like all this why that comes back to like knowing this plant has been an awesome thing for so many people. And I've seen both the economic, personal, individual, spiritual relationship of this thing that like as it's become freed through the MRTA, fighting against the CRTA because we didn't want to see that expression of legalization, but something that gives us hope through community reinvestment, through, again, prioritization of folks who've been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. Like all of that makes this worth it and exciting to play in. And as we've discussed earlier, it's still like a gamble. We're still betting on agriculture, and that's never a safe bet. So,
what's really fascinating to me is how fast the destigmatization happened. Because I started smoking very young too, and I remember back then it was sketchy a lot of the time. Like, and now. I posted this on Instagram because it was so funny, but like earlier this week was my birthday, and I got a
happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. I bring that up because I'm a member of Planet Fitness, and they sent me a gift card for free gummies. And I'm like, this is so weird, man. Like 10 years ago, it wouldn't have even been a thought, but. Now my gym is giving me free weed. That's bizarre.
Oh my God.
But so
better than alcohol.
Yeah, better than alcohol. And I wanna turn to Britni and Jayson too to talk a bit about your path of ending up in the legal marketplace, and it's a tough industry, and what your hope for it as you're in your second month now, where you hope it'll end up.
It's funny because Jayson and I started in different places, but ended up our journeys merged in life. But similar to probably Zach and everybody, I used cannabis in my youth as medicine, even though I didn't know it was medicine, because I experienced a lot of anxiety. I grew up in a community, according to the Census Bureau, that is 95% white when I lived there as a child. I didn't go to school with kids of color. I was the kid of color. And so being somebody that was attached to that plant, whether using it or selling it, I was definitely targeted, racially profiled in the community. Yep. I would be with my friends and I'd constantly be pulled over and pulled up by 2-3 cops because they knew I was a cannabis user. Hence, I am card. I actually had another charge, but I was very young, so it's sealed. And then I had another one when I was older. I was lucky to not do prison time, but I was very close to it. Unfortunately, my sister did. And in lieu of that, I was at risk, but did not. And so, cannabis, depending on, where you are and how you grew up and the circumstance, is really what has led all of us together. For me, my circumstance was I was not in a diverse community. I was somebody who sold cannabis, used cannabis, was easily targeted. My charge was published in the county newspaper. There was no social media. Everybody read that paper.
Oh, God.
So I couldn't get a job because everybody owned the grocery store, the pizza shop. Talk about the ridicule, the embarrassment to my family. To them, I was selling crack or I was selling heroin, but I wasn't, Not to mention the other children in the community or other young adults were doing it as well. The difference was their father was best friends with the sheriff and their grandpa's the judge. So they're never going to prison. And I think when you talk about large cities, I think what people often forget about are these rural communities that are very much where people get targeted and profiled and sent to prison.
Yep.
Okay, because those people have that power. And part of my story really stems from that and amplifying so people become aware. I know others that come from communities such as myself, you know, what that put my mother through, us through for many, many years. Having this dispensary is everything. You know, I lost my mother unexpectedly 3 years ago, and I would have loved for her to have been there in that moment because it is a vindication. When you are a person of color and me being a woman minority, it is different how we walk and move through this world and how we are perceived. Maybe if I grew up somewhere different, it would have been a different experience, but that wasn't the case for me. So when that fight and why, because it's in me, you know, it's been a part of me. So when I look at all these other card members, you know, and how we've come together in collaboration, a lot of us come from that. We come from poverty, we come from racial profiling, we come from a lot of different things. So I'm grateful. I'm very optimistic of the future, Gino, to your last question. You know, with the work that the governor has done, appointing Chelsea Davis, the Secretary of Cannabis, I believe she's done a wonderful job in guiding and her oversight with Felicia and Patrick and everyone over there. I've seen results from them. I've seen some normalization. Believe me, we have a lot of work to do. I know there's a lot going on in this industry, but I can be thankful that they're listening, and we're moving forward in a collaborative effort throughout the supply chain with agency and even our legislators.
So, Britni, you've told me your story before, and the thought I had at the time was this is the exact person this law was meant to benefit. This is the way the law is written and the intents of it is meant to, you know, undo the harm that happened to you and give you a chance to. The word you use, vindicated, I think is the right term for it. And with just a few minutes left, Felicia, I want to give you a chance to respond to, you know, Britni just told her story and whether you think that how the state can help enable people like Britni to be a part of this market and lead this market.
Sure. So I do want to answer actually your previous question, and it's personal on two fronts, right? So, you know, my husband has a condition that has no cure, and it's painful and it's difficult. And he's terrified of opioids. You know, he's has family members who have suffered because of opioids. And so, you know, he had got a medical card when he could, but one of the things, I'm a very sort of do-it-myself person, and I'm a grower, right? We feed ourselves off of our farms throughout the entire summer, fall, and winter. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to grow this so he can have access to it, right? And so I spent, you know, a lot of time taking courses and learning about, you know, New York Botanical Garden had a cannabis course. I took all of that and figured out how to dial in for my specific strain and my soil. And, you know, you mentioned soil, someone mentioned soil health, and I think about like the Living Soil Handbook, which is my Bible, and I love a no-till bed. So we could talk on that offline, but all that to say is I grew this plant, and then it was something I could give to the person I love the most to help with their pain. I've never had that kind of agency. I've had a lot of agency. I work for an agency, but like I've never been able to have such a direct connection to something like that. And that meant the world to me. On another point, you know, we were in a car accident 2 years ago off of 87, spun out, and my side got hit by a tractor trailer. I couldn't walk. I was in the hospital for quite a while, and I, you know, terrified of opioids. I did not want to be on them, and they gave me so many. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go back to cannabis. Like that is something I know. That is something that I've taken from literally a seed to, you know, consumption. And that is something I can navigate. That is something I can handle. And it's something that ultimately helped and got me through, you know, recovery. And so my connection is very, very personal to this plant. At the same time, I've had the experience of seeing what this plant can do and what its power can be for communities. And that to me is something that I very much want to keep going and putting folks of color who have been marginalized, who have been denied every opportunity and access, been stigmatized over time. I want them to lead this industry. This is not my industry, right? This is an industry that I have the great privilege and honor of being a part of. It's not mine. And so I know it belongs to folks like Britni and Jayson, and I know that there are people here who they have the solutions to making cannabis be as great as it can be in New York State. It's not the agency, and so it's incumbent upon us to keep hearing from them so that their perspectives and their practice and their experience with this plant leads us as an agency to make the kinds of rules and regulations and common sense principles that make sense for the growth of this industry. And so that's sort of why it's incredibly important for me to have conversations like this, but also think about at the end of the day, who is showing up in this industry, who is in this industry, and who needs, support and resources. And so I think very pointedly around the card community and our C community, and thinking about, the discrepancies in capitalization between those small businesses and larger businesses. As a state, we need to figure out how to ensure that folks have access to capital, access to resources, and the access to community. Can we leverage all of the places that we are in the state to leverage agency resources, local resources, and bring them to the cannabis community so that they can benefit? And if we have to do it differently, that's going to be informed by what we're hearing from them and what we're seeing from them, what they're experiencing, not what we think in our agency building, right? So, it's incredibly important to me to have folks who live this every day leading in this industry.
We have about 30 seconds left, but Zach, tell us where we can find Flower City.
We can find all over New York State, upstate, downstate. We got MJ over in Henrietta. We got Good Life over on 155 Monroe Avenue, and hopefully soon to be in Flower City. Now we got some new stuff coming on shelves.
Zach grows some of the best weed in the area, so thanks for being here. And Britni and Jayson, tell us a bit about Flower City Dispensary.
Flower City Dispensary can be found at 8053 Victor in Victor, New York, Pittsford, Victor.
8053 Pittsford Victor Road, right next to Eastview Mall, between U-Haul and the Target entrance.
Cool.
And Felicia from the Office of Cannabis Management, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time. All right, thank you.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Eben Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.